Here we go. We're on. We're on with Kevin Hester. Welcome to Black Bear News. Kevin Hester from Edge of Extinction, Nature Best Last, doing great work in New Zealand. And Kevin, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this.
It's a pleasure to check in with you today, buddy. I think the channel that you've got on YouTube is doing some spectacular work, and I admire you for taking up the cudgels and having the kind of conversations that no one wants to.
Thank you. Yeah, trying. I mean, we cover a lot of stuff, so you know, around the science and around everything around the science. So I think there's a lot of levels to this problem.
It's spectacularly hard to keep up, isn't it? It
is. I mean, there's just an onslaught of information and things going on right now.
It's a tsunami of everything bad.
Right. Yeah, I'm finding it a little difficult to keep up, and actually, I kind of just I switch off every once in a while. Lately I've just been, taking it in and thinking about it, but so there's a point in the day when I just have to like turn my brain off and turn everything off because I'm like overwhelmed.
I think that's really important, and that's an important part of this discussion.
Yeah,
is that a lot of us are fully immersed in this, and how could you not be? Because it's the biggest story of all time that no one wants to talk about. There's a certain kind of people who want to go down that rabbit hole and confront the monster, but at the same time, for our own sanity and our personal health, we have to find ways to compartmentalize it, deal with it and not deal with it. You can't deal with it 24/7 and expect to survive.
Not at all. Yeah, you have to have one foot in, one foot in the world, and in I guess trying to keep yourself sane, and then the other.
There's a fantastic quote from Edward Abbey where he says that action is the antidote to despair.
Right.
And I think we've got to find some kind of way that we do positive action, because a lot of the things that we have been going on about for decades aren't going to do anything. And, I question to a large degree now walking down streets with banners. I've been doing it for 40 years. Mm-hmm. But we've been sort of compartmentalized, and the whole protest movement has been, to a degree, hijacked by the dominant culture. And all it does now is, there's this big emphasis on peaceful demonstrating and not breaking the law and all that sort of stuff. And I just find it bullshit.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves is people marching on a Saturday, and making it a party, kind of, and something for everybody to kind of like Instagram and Facebook about, like, oh, here we are at the protest, have fun with that, like that's cool if you want to go out and socialize and be around people that think like you. I guess there's a certain power in that, but like you're not really going to change the status quo or change the paradigm on any significant level, that way.
There's a famous song by Linton Kwesi Johnson where he talks about freedom of speech as long as you don't say too much.
Right.
And this kind of demonstrating is the approved amount of discord.
Right. Exactly. Man, you quoted two really influential, great people already in this interview, Linton Kwesi Johnson and Edward Abbey. So I appreciate that.
I had the honor of seeing LKJ play in Brixton in London.
Right.
And he was a really formative musician and poet. And, I know you're a musician, and I think artists get a lot of these things in a different way, because they're so used to expressing themselves in an artistic way.
Right. And I also think that artists are artists are way more open than to ideas and to emotions than other normal people, I guess, or whatever. And so you find artists on the forefront of political, social movements. I mean, that's why you have conscious music not on the radio anymore, and being specifically sidelined, right? There's no Bob Marley's, or there's no people who are really saying something. You'll never hear them on the radio anymore, because they just don't. They know how powerful that instrument is. You have to seek that out. You can still make that kind of music, but you're never going to hear big social Sly and the Family Stone type people, on the radio anymore. It's just not going to happen, because there's a vested interest in keeping people on the surface and just talking about money and partying. So
I virtually watch no TV. Well, I don't even have a TV anymore. I watch everything on demand. I go and search and look for what I want to hear and see. And then I mix in those circles. So I actually have it filtered down to what I want. But the general Joe, who's just completely overwhelmed by trying to survive every day, of course, they come home and they flop down in front of the corporate media and they suck it up.
Yep, absolutely. And it's apparent, on it's kind of apparent on my social media timelines that there are people that are there are very small number of people who are really connected into like what's going on and what's happening, and I appreciate those people for saying things that are hard to say in this day and time. But the number of those people on my Facebook timeline or Twitter timeline, maybe more so on Facebook, are less than 10, less than 5 maybe, and everybody else is just talking about the headline of the day or the whatever, the outrage du jour, which is fine too. But like, there's there are way more levels of problems that we are dealing with in this world, and I think people don't really want to connect to it. People that follow you, people that follow me, I think are connected to something that is pretty overwhelming for people to understand. But yeah, man, you sent me some really good topics to kind of get into talking about, that I wanted to get into. Let me see if I can pull these up. So one of the things you sent me was something about connecting the dots on the multitude of crises spiraling into chaos at the same time. Water security, food production collapse, nutritional value of crops plummeting inversely proportional to the increase of carbon, collapse of the flying insect populations. So do you want to speak on some of those, or get into talking about some of that?
Well, there's this convergence of this multitude of different crises all happening at the same time. I interviewed Paul Ehrlich just recently about a peer-reviewed paper that he had published, which had in the title The Annihilation of Nature. And it's unheard of to use that kind of terminology in peer-reviewed papers. And that was about the collapse of the flying insect population in France and Germany, where in the last 20 years we've lost 80%, 27 years actually, we've lost 80% of the flying insect populations. And predominantly, that is not climate change. That is the fact that we bathe the planet in herbicides and insecticides, and we've gone to so much monocropping that habitat is collapsing for those. So that's a really fundamental shift in status for the planet, especially for those areas. And it's not actually, strictly speaking, a climate change issue. Climate change is making that worse, but it's just everywhere you look, we have completely and utterly toasted the biosphere. And now we see this perfect storm where all these different dichotomies are converging, and people just can't face it. It's extraordinary, the cognitive dissonance around this whole situation that we're confronted with. The average people just cannot bear to look at it. They turn and look away.
Yeah, and I feel, I feel for people, you know, in that state, you know, I have a great amount of sympathy and or empathy, you know, with people being confronted with something like so hard, you know, so harsh. I mean, whatever it is that allows you and I to see this problem for what it is and just be able to look at it head on and go, this is what's happening. You know, I don't know, is a unique um, personality trait or type, you know, or cognitive trait or type compared to, you know, a lot of people see this problem for the massive problem that it is. And, you know, their reaction is to, you know, keep doing what we're doing, you know, just keep going forward, or let's just be positive, or let's just, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, people get overwhelmed. There's a very good article that I read recently by Joanna Macy called "The Greatest Danger," and one of the big takeout quotes from it was, "quote Because of social taboos, despair at the state of our world and fear for our future are rarely acknowledged. The suppression of despair, like that of any deep recurring response, contributes to the numbing of the psyche." It's a very, very incisive comment where if you don't confront your grief and if you don't confront your despair, it just boils up inside of you. And you know, this is why everyone is so sick. They're bottling up these really important emotions that are critically important to get out. One of the things I admire about you and your channel is I also see in your social life that you have children and you love them passionately, and that you have a very big involvement as a family man. And I think that it's extraordinarily courageous for a person with young children to be able to face this, because this is the dichotomy. Most people who have children just cannot bear to consider this situation. And it's just it's stupefying and paralyzing for a lot of people. And I think that's where a lot of people are. They're paralyzed. They're the deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't want that to sound cold and harsh. You know, I have a lot of empathy, and I'm really, really heartbroken for people in that situation. I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews, and I'm surrounded by babies, and I'm immersed in them, and I love that part of my life. But my heart goes out to all parents who are confronted with this this worst of all possible consequences.
I don't think you need to have children to understand, you know, how devastating this can be to, you know, to anyone, you know, like any, you know, if you love anybody, if you, you know, if you have anybody dear and near to your heart, you know, this is, you know, this is something that affects everyone. This is something that, you know,
it's the beautiful burden of the empath.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing, and it is a burden at the same time.
Right. Indeed. And you know, as you were saying about the having this cognitive dissonance, or having this these feelings of being overwhelmed, this overwhelming, you know, fear or despair or whatever bubbling up, like, you know, you see that. I mean, not just about climate change, but about the state of the world in general. You know, that's also not just a climate change problem. Like I see, you know, in the States, people overwhelmingly having that feeling about, you know, about racial injustice, and about people being, you know, killed by overzealous policemen, and you know, there's just a lot of like racial tension, a lot of racial. I wouldn't even call it tension. I would call it like just an outpouring of like, you know, this is, you know, we've had enough, you know, and you know, and that's happening with, you know, it's happening with women. It's happening with, you know, people are just tired of, you know, what our world has become, and what, you know, human beings are doing to each other and to the planet. And, you know, all of these things are all part of the same, you know, somehow part of the same tree. But I don't see how we can get through any of that or get over, you know, what's going on, or not get over, but confront what's happening and, you know, see a path through this mess without, you know, really confronting it, really having, you know, embracing, you know, these issues, embracing climate change issues, embracing, you know, people's pain and grief and suffering. And it's, you know, I don't know, it's a huge Gordian knot of a problem.
As a sailor, I would refer to it as the perfect storm.
Right.
We have the catastrophic convergence of early stage run and the reemergence of fascism.
Right. Right.
And my heart goes out to my North American comrades who are living in the belly of the beast. I can't comprehend what it must be like to wake up every morning and see what the military industrial complexes, what Armageddon they've created overnight. And
Right.
every time I watch that, whenever I see these latest outbursts of militarism around the planet, if you have a look at the New York Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange, you can see the trajectory of the share prices of the military industrial complex are intrinsically linked to the trajectory of their missiles. The more the missiles fly, the more the stock price flies. Of course, there's going to be more war.
Right.
It's a business plan. It's a sensible business move to pull the fucking trigger.
Right. Exactly. I mean, you know, how can we even pull ourselves out of military conflict if it means, you know, economic losses or a loss in GDP or a loss? I mean,
you know, to a large extent, it's a war economy. The U.S. economy is a war economy.
Oh, our entire economy in the United States, I don't know if people realize how much our economy is propped up by the military. I mean, if the military were not one of the major drivers of our economy, well, you know, what would we be? What would we be making? What would we be doing? How would we be existing? It would be completely different.
Well, you're good at growing pot, apparently.
Excuse me?
You're good at growing pot. Isn't there a lot of pot being grown in the United States now legally?
That's going to do it. I think pot is going to save us from the military-industrial complex.
It's a new corporation. It's a whole new industry. It's one of the few new industries that can be monetized.
Yeah.
And it's great because it can sequester carbon. There's a whole lot of good things about pot.
There are, but then there's also, I just saw that Monsanto and Bayer were trying to get into the pot farming business. So
of course they will. Of course they will. Of course they'll genetically engineer it. These people, the psychopathy and sociopathy can't help itself. It'll dive on anything.
Right. Exactly. Everything has to be co-opted and manipulated. Must happen. Well,
everything has to be monetized.
Right.
I see the Greens in New Zealand. One of the members of the Green Party in New Zealand that I know personally, I see him posting something. He started a new thing where he's promoting a green economy and green monetarism and green growth. Mm-hmm. These people just don't get the point at all that you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet.
Right.
It's really fucking simple.
Right. Right. And I think that's a very, you know, that alone, that one, you know, concept or idea is really hard for people to place into their lives. Right. You know, if you say, because everybody actually, you know, if you're living in this paradigm, if you're living in this economic system, you know, your life is about growth, right? You know, even your aspirations, your dreams, your goals, you know, everything you're doing is about making more money and making your family comfortable and buying more stuff and having these things. And like, this is such deep programming. Like the programming is so deep. It starts, you know, when you're 2, 3, the first time you watch TV or watch a commercial, you know, kids are just programmed with this this is what we do, is we just get more stuff and we buy more stuff and we make more stuff and we need more stuff. And it's like, you know, how do you tell people that every single, like, everything about how they live is fundamentally wrong? You know, like, it is a political, you know, it's a political problem, but it's definitely a personal problem. It's definitely a psychological problem. Like, you tell people to just, you know, don't buy anything for the next year. Seriously, like, try that out. Or, you know, don't buy anything but essentials. Let's say food. You know, I know that's it.
Didn't George W. Bush say after the 3 buildings miraculously fell down in New York, wasn't one of the things that he said that day is keep shopping?
Right. Come on, guys. You know, we can't have a hit to the economy because of this terrorist attack or whatever it was. We can't have that happen, you know, just, yeah, keep buying. Keep buying things.
It just reflects the insanity of the situation when we're in such catastrophic things happen, and the solution is keep shopping.
Right.
That just shows you how off the rails the species has gone.
Right. It's, yeah, I mean, I just don't, you know, what would people do? You know, if you told people, like, it's, you know, it's the buying and the selling and the constant commerce of, you know, needing more and more and more, that's, you know, our problem. Like, so what do you replace that with? You know, you tell people that, you know, maybe your life should just be about, you know, growing food for your family and just, you know, or that, you know, maybe you shouldn't be taking all the plane trips you're taking all this year, or, you know, planning all these vacations. Like, you know, what would you replace that with? Like, I see more people accepting this. I see more people kind of getting the gist of it, but it's, you know, it's really hard, even for people who are enlightened and conscious. You know, it's really hard for them to stop doing that. It's really hard for me to stop doing that. So
I totally get that. One of the things that I'm confronted with is that I've spent a lot of time traveling. I've been to 50 countries over the years. So my carbon footprint is just completely and absolutely outrageous. It's not much I can do about what I did in the past. I can only alter what I'm doing in the future.
right.
But I see all my friends jumping on planes and flying up to Pacific Islands and doing all sorts of things like that.
Right.
And unwittingly, they're shortening the life of their children. They're flying to Polynesia to take their kids on a great holiday, and it's going to shorten their lives. 8% of all global emissions are tourism. In one fell swoop, we could make a huge reduction in our carbon footprint if we terminated outrageous indulgent tourism. But of course, that's never going to happen.
Oh no, yeah. Again, you know, what would happen to you know,
it's a classic. People would complain about all the jobs that would be lost.
Right.
And you know, the standard reply to that is there are no jobs on a dead planet.
Right. Exactly. It's you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
And you're an asshole if you mention it.
Right. Right. Shut up, man. We're trying to have a good time here. Please.
You say to a parent, do you realize you're shortening your child's life? And the parent replies, oh, don't be such an asshole.
Right. Right. I mean, it's, you know, it's you know, it's a different reality is coming soon, I think, you know, so.
I think,
I don't think we have long for this paradigm. And
yeah,
when it happens, it's just gonna happen. And then people are gonna be like, oh, okay, now, you know, now what do we do? Now what happens? Now, you know, what's the next step? I mean, it's going to be a lot of scrambling.
Yeah, it's going to get ugly very quickly. People don't understand how quickly it's going to change. It's already changing radically quickly, and we're on the bottom end of Michael E. Mann's hockey stick theory.
Right.
Where it will accelerate away now at a breathtaking pace. It will be literally hard to keep your breath and keep up with it. And I mean that now on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. You know, I'm not talking about in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time. I'm talking about in 10 and 20 days' time.
Right. I mean, we literally have to wake up every day going like, okay, all this stuff is still here. You know, like we get another day of all this stuff being here.
I had Daj Jamal, a staff reporter from truthout.org, come and stay with me in New Zealand last year.
Yeah.
And we did research for his new book. He's got a book coming out called The End of Ice, coming out in December. And we did some research for the book. And while Dar was staying here, we'd get up in the morning and he'd turn his computer on and he'd say something like, "Great news, mate, nuclear war didn't start in the night." You know, this was just after Donald Trump had been elected president of the United States.
Right.
And we made jokes like that. And I literally feel like that. I get up every morning, I get up and watch the beautiful dawn in front of my home, and I turn my computer on. And the thing that surprises me most is that capitalism and industrial civilization can, and America can continue to print money.
Right.
You know, if you look at history, all fiat currencies all collapsed. And America, since 2008, since that crash, America has been printing money like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
Well, you know, there's a reason for that cliche, that expression.
Right. I mean, we're way past the edge, you know. We've gone, you know, past there's like a cycle, you know, what is it? There's a certain amount of time in which fiat currency can operate before it collapses. And
Yeah.
we've overshot that time span by a couple decades. So we're just, you know, every day is, you know, great. We're still here. We're lucky, you know, we made it.
Yeah, that's the nature of Ponzi schemes. As long as you can keep faking it and inflating it, it carries on, and then they tend to implode. And I suspect that the implosion has taken place, but we just don't realize it.
Yeah. Well, quite a few economic, you know, I guess soothsayers are, you know, have been saying like we're already in the collapse. We just don't know, you know, we just don't know that it's happening yet. It hasn't shown itself in an obvious way. You said something in these notes that you sent me that I thought was pretty apt about speed wobbles on a bicycle. You know, when I was a kid, I used to ride skateboards, and we used to do that too. We would go down a hill. You start going down the hill, and your skateboard would start wobbling a little bit, and be like, and then it would be like this, and then you're like on the ground. I thought it was a good.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that's where we're at. We're going fast and going faster, and the whole system has got the wobbles, and you can see that. But the trouble is that we're not taking our foot off the accelerator. We're not slowing down. We're going faster and faster. All it means is that the impact is going to be more and more severe. And the denial of the speed wobbles means that we are making the problem worse and worse and worse. People criticize us for talking about how bad the situation is, and that, you know, oh, you've got to give people hope and you've got to give something people to look forward to. I'm sorry, when you have late stage prostate cancer and you're going to die, you know you're going to die. What we have to realize is that the whole biosphere and everything we know, love, and hold dear is in hospice. Because we're not prepared to accept that, we're not preparing for the catastrophic outcomes that are bearing down on us. The level of denial, the cognitive dissonance and denial at the edge of extinction is extraordinary. It's an incredible case study in psychology.
Yeah, and it's, you know, people are going to hold on to that denial or hope or positive thinking or, you know, manifestation or whatever it is that they're holding on to until they can't, you know, until they can't hold on.
Well, you know, in lots of ways we behave like junkies. You know, we're addicted to carbon. We're addicted to industrial civilization. We're addicted to our devices.
Right.
And we're addicted to our way of life. Because collapse isn't unfolding in your dining room and in my dining room, because the famine in my fridge and my pantry hasn't struck, we're going about our normal lives. But if you look at what's happening in Africa now, there are millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people who are starving now, and it's never going to get better. Right. The Sahara is going to become uninhabitable really soon. It's already in the process of becoming uninhabitable. But because those people are people of color, they've never ever been appreciated and looked after and respected to the same level as Western cultures. So those people are dying right now, and it's the same old racist fucking story. No one cares, or only a few of us care.
Right. Or, I think the Western viewpoint on that is, they've always been, it's all, people in Africa have always been starving. It's always been, a crisis, or they don't have any food, or they don't have, like, it's just kind of like a shrug, right? Oh, there's millions of people in Africa starving. Like, oh, wasn't that happening? It's like, there's war in the Middle East. Wasn't that happening 5 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 50 years ago? Like, it's, if you hear the same kind of story going on, but now it's for a different reason. It's something that's going to spread to us, and we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So it's okay for us to just be like, okay, and that's just kind of I think that's our entitled, our entitled Western mindset, is that, as long as we're okay, then everything's fine. You know what I'm noticing, and this has actually been freaking me out. There are a lot of half dead and half dead trees where I live. And it's very, if you start noticing it, it's everywhere. But, most people wouldn't look at it because there's enough green, there's enough green growth around us to, that there's nothing wrong. But if you actually really look closely at the trees here, I'm looking at one right across the street from my house, and half the leaves are dead. And as I've been driving around LA, I see it all, there's rows of trees and half the leaves are dead, or some of the trees are dead. And I'm like, okay, what happens when all these trees are dead? What does this start, when do people start freaking out about,
joining the dots?
Right. Oh my God,
all
the trees are dead. What are we going to do?
This is an issue of urbanization. Urbanized people aren't as the same degree, they're not as attached or as connected with the natural environment as country people. So a lot of people won't be noticing it. But in the circles that we travel in, and in our social media circles, you see people talking about this all the time.
Right. Right.
One of the things that's going to happen, because we've changed the jet streams and changed the atmosphere so much, is we're going to see that the forests in South America, the rainforests, they're gonna die like the tree outside your house. And when those trees die and when those rainforests dry out, they burn. So all that carbon will be re-emitted into the atmosphere. So you have the double whammy of you're losing your sinks and you're increasing your emitters. And that's happening across the globe. Right. There's only information's just starting to come out now about it, but people are starting to realize that the oceans are starting to outgas carbon. We're already getting to the point where they're saturated, and we're looking at Canfield situations where we're getting lots of algae blooms and all sorts of hypoxic areas in the ocean. We'll see the oceans start outgassing carbon if they haven't already started, and things will change really, really rapidly.
Right. I think so, and not just right. The oceans aren't just releasing carbon; they're releasing heat with that carbon, because they've been storing all the heat that's been coming. They've stored 90% of the heat.
Yeah.
That the Earth is.
And that's why, and not just the heat, but the carbon, and that's why they become more acidic as well.
Right. So when all of that starts pouring out, and we get another El Nino this year or next year.
Yeah, the two sites that I follow with regard to El Nino is the Australian Bureau of Meteorology and the Japanese equivalent, and they both have us on El Nino watch, right, where they're thinking that in our spring, we're in the middle of our winter now, and then our spring, your autumn, we may transit into a El Nino, and it depends whether it'll be a minor one or a major one. But because we put everything on steroids, my anecdotal observation would be that I'd expect it to be a strong El Nino rather than a weak one. And if that does happen, I think we'll see the end of the Great Barrier Reef, because we've had these bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. The worst of them that have ever happened in its million-year history have all happened this century.
Right.
And there's about a 15-year time period after a bad bleaching event before a reef can recover, if it's not completely wiped out. But there will be no 15-year period of grace for these reefs to reestablish themselves. So I firmly believe the next El Nino will wipe out the reef. And the grief of me thinking about that, let alone watching it, is just absolutely heartbreaking. I did an 800-mile sail down the Great Barrier Reef where I dived every day. I'm sort of intimately connected to it, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah. And that's a pretty big signal that that things are bad.
Well, it's one of the main incubators of the marine food web. It's the oldest and largest single living organism on the planet. It's, when I say single living organism, it's a combination of gazillions and bazillions of organisms, but it is one unit, and it's dying, and we've killed it. And what are we doing? What is the Australian government doing in response to the death of the Great Barrier Reef? They're giving permits for mines like the Adani mine, and they're building railway lines, and they're going to build ports adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef so they can export coal.
Right. And wasn't I read somewhere that a Chinese company was going to build like a pipeline or something, near the reef. I don't know. This is maybe a year or two ago, but they were going to basically bulldoze part of the coast in Australia, and it was right next to the reef, and it was just gonna wreck everything. And they were like, "Okay, we're gonna do this," So, yeah, it's amazing that we're still ramping up the building and the projects and in light of the fact that the Barrier Reef has, lost so much of it's dead. A lot of it is dead. So
it's in hospice. Yeah. I would describe it as in hospice. It is on a trajectory to be dead, and nothing that is being done is going to mitigate that. So it is on its way out, and that's why I've been dreading so much the next El Nino, because I'll have to go through the grief that I watched over the last couple of years as it was bleaching. And for us people who have sailed it and dived it and been intimately connected to it, it really is like losing a family member. And, this family member is crucial to the integrity of the family.
Right.
It's like a foundation stone that the whole edifice is mounted on. And we just keep removing them. I referred to what we're doing as being climate and extinction Jenga, where we keep pulling out one species after another out of the stack, and we don't expect the stack to fall down. But anyone who's played Jenga knows that it's a path to Armageddon.
Yeah. And to go back to the, you were talking about the insects, losing so many insects. That is also another whammy that's going to be, I think affecting us very, very soon, in that, we've already lost so many pollinators. There's no, my garden doesn't, can't be pollinated because there's not enough pollinators. There's not enough bees. There's no more bees where I'm at. We see one straggling little lone bee, like, yeah, I'm over here. But there's not enough to do the work. And, at what point does that become critical to, the food that the entire population of the planet depends on to eat? I mean, it's it's a grim picture, cascading.
In China, they have people who climb into trees with a pollinator brush
Yep.
to pollinate their trees because they've lost all their bees.
And that is amazing. I mean, I don't know if we can keep up with that kind of loss of pollinators, but that's actually how I pollinated one of my plants by self. I did the pollination, and I've been waiting to try to pollinate these other plants, but there's no female flowers, so I can't. There's nothing to pollinate.
Wow.
So it's, I can see it's pretty dire if this is happening in my yard. I live in, one of the largest food producing states in the world. California is responsible for a lot of food, and what happens when all these farms go down.
Yeah, and one of the problems we have with the increase in carbon and with the increased heat that goes with it is that in a lot of these grain growing areas in Russia and Canada and the United States, because of the droughts and other extenuating circumstances, crop yields are dropping quite significantly at the moment. I've noticed that happening in a lot of different places, but an often overlooked aspect of this is as the carbon content in the atmosphere goes up, the nutritional value of a lot of these crops goes down.
Right.
So for every kilo of crop that you grow, there's less nutrition in it. And then when you have these big droughts and crop numbers fall, you're getting the fall in the A in the amount of it, and B in its value.
Right.
It's a slippery slope, and it's only going in one direction. None of these things are going in the right direction. Every single one of them,
right,
cumulatively, are going in the wrong direction.
Right. Absolutely. I was just watching a Paul Beckwith video right before I was talking to you about sea ice loss and basically heat, the heat wave situation and the amount of warming that's happening, and the fact that we are in a neutral, we're coming out of a La Nina neutral, we're in a neutral state as far as La Nina, El Nino. So, what happens when we flip into El Nino? I mean, we're already, everything is escalating. Even in a time when we were supposed to have a little break or a little, possible cooling, and that's not happening. What we're getting is more heating. 2018 is already turning out to be a hellacious summer for a lot of people around the world. So this is not, this is not good news. So what do you think? So what do you think about one of the other topics you sent me? We're just going to go in this direction. You wanted to talk about the possibility of nuclear war being used as an excuse to cool the planet. What do you think? You think there's plans in place? You think people are scheming on this? You think some mad scientists out there are like, you know what? If we could just set off a couple of these things.
Well, we saw it with Pinatubo. When Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, there was a cooling effect that was noticeable very quickly. And what you got to remember is how quickly it can happen. When you increase global dimming, which is to put more pollutants in the air, or you decrease it, the temperature response is pretty much instantaneous.
Yeah.
When the planes were grounded in the United States for those first 3 days after 9/11, right, there was a 1 degree temperature increase in the United States directly attributed to that loss of dimming.
Yeah.
So when industrial civilization falls over, there will be a massive spike immediately. Within days, there'll be an immediate spike. And the same thing would be achieved if there was a nuclear exchange and a whole lot of dust was thrown up into the atmosphere. Depending on the size of the nuclear exchange, there will be cooling. Well, hello, we're heading towards extinction because of overheating.
Right.
They have a device. They've got thousands of these devices. They've always wanted to use them.
Yeah.
They will use them. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that they will use them. And they will be planning, they will be concocting, they will be scheming about how they're going to do it. And I've thought there's a distinct possibility that there will be a false flag. And, you know, both of the last major wars were started with false flags. I think there'll be a false flag, and we will see a detonation take place, and then we'll get to see degrees of cooling. And it, you know, it's the great experiment. And these psychopaths are the kind of people who would jump at the opportunity.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you that, you know, there are people out there that could be like, this is totally plausible. We could do this, you know, it'll be, this is a good thing. We could do this. And
they will be saying, we have to do this.
Right. Right.
It's our God-given duty.
Right. Well, and then you get the, if it is a false flag or a, you know, perfect excuse for the government to lock things down even more, right? To make people more afraid. I mean, because think about the panic, the absolute terror that people would feel if there was a nuclear exchange or a nuclear bomb went off somewhere, right? I mean, it would be 9/11 on steroids, because people would be like, oh my God, you know, yeah. What's about to happen? Anything, do anything you need to do, whatever you got to do, you do it, you know. President Trump or whoever, you know, whoever's in charge, that, you know, I can just see, you know, you take this false flag or a nuclear exchange, and then you just ramp up the lockdown of the people, even more so, right? Because you've got a perfect excuse. Like, look, guys, we're gonna save you from the bad guy, but, you know, we're gonna have to.
We were brainstorming scenarios about, was, you know, the military industrial complex has it in for Iran, and one scenario that I outlined was that they could easily smuggle a nuclear device into Iran, just in a container. You could get one in a 40-foot container,
Right,
and detonate it,
right.
And then say, look, see, the Iranians did have nuclear weapons. One of them's gone off on them.
Right.
Completely plausible. When you're talking about the psychopathy that we're discussing, it's completely plausible. And what interesting thing happened to me quite a few months ago. I was on a barge, and a guy came up to me and he said, I saw you and Guy McPherson on YouTube having a discussion, and we'd mentioned this about the potential for a nuclear war. And he said, are you aware, he was in the insurance industry, and he said, are you aware that if there's a nuclear exchange in anger, that all airline insurance is cancelled?
Okay.
But yeah, because the electromagnetic pulse and a whole lot of other things that would take place in a nuclear strike or a nuclear detonation has the ability to shut down electronics. So they would ground all their planes straight away. Well, if that happened on a global scale, we would lose the global dimming, and we would get runaway that day.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's how quickly it can all change.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that's not in the cards in the future.
Notice how both of us, when we said that, we both chuckled and laughed. Yellow's humor is an important part of this story.
Yeah.
You've got to somehow or other be able to laugh this off, or else you're just going to rip your hair out.
Yeah, and I have a habit of laughing at things which are terrible and true, right? You know, so if something is terribly true, it's a weird, you know, it's a weird, like, physiological response as I start laughing. Yeah. It's true.
It's very common. It's a nervous response. A lot of people really respond like that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, you know, it's tough, you know, it's a tough information to take in. So, you know, it's gonna cause a lot of responses in people, all kinds of responses in people.
Hate is the normal one I get.
Hate?
Yeah. People hate on me for talking about this.
Oh,
It's quite extraordinary. I draw the parallels with the kind of conversations we're having now, with the conversations that anti-fascists were having in 1937 and 38 and 39, when they are talking about the rise of fascism. And a lot of people were put down, and they would say, oh, don't exaggerate it, you know?
right.
You're exaggerating. Me and Guy McPherson are called alarmists. But in 1937, when people were talking about the re-rise of fascism, they didn't know that 8 brutal years later, 60 million people would be, and billions of other species.
Yeah.
You know, when these big wars happen, when all the shit goes down, we always hear how many fatalities there are. And they always talk about human fatalities.
Right.
When there's a big earthquake, or all these volcanic eruptions in Hawaii, you'd hear they'd say, oh, there's been all this action today, but no fatalities. Bullshit. If thousands of acres burn, there are millions of fatalities.
Right.
They're just not humans. This is the other species that are never, ever treated with the same respect. And that's how we've got ourselves into this hole. Because we didn't have respect for the other species, and because we treated them with such disrespect, we've brought our own extinction on ourselves. It's quite an extraordinary scenario. Very few species drove themselves to extinction.
Yes, we're doing a pretty good job of being the going against the rule of driving ourselves. I don't know. We're the exception to the rule is what I'm trying to say. But we're doing a good job of getting there ourselves. And that's an interesting thing, is how little we value the natural world, you know, around us, how little we value, you know, we only value plants and animals if they can give us stuff, you know, but that's the immediate stuff, right? The food or the meat or whatever, but we don't value the more nuanced processes of, you know, ecosystems and people's right, you know, animals' right to, you know, live and do the things that they need to do. We haven't connected all of that into, you know, that actually helps us, right? You know, this is.
But what I would say in relation to that is that in the community of people that know how bad the situation is and know that we're facing extinction, that community is very tuned in to all the things that are happening around them. And as a result, I'm convinced that we are more attached and more aware and observant of the natural world. The more I've learned about how dire the situation is, the more I appreciate the natural world around me. I take great pleasure in the tiniest little things now that I used to ignore and would go over my head. And I think that's a takeout for that people who are listening to this or are trying to puzzle out how they're going to deal with this dichotomy. There's a lot of good that can be taken out of this story. You really realize how dire the situation is. So you realize how fortunate we are to be able to sit here and have this conversation and show some respect to the other species.
Absolutely. Yes. And, you know, and where we are at in the process of extinction, I think that, you know, we can really, you know, as Dar Jamel did, you know, appreciate every day, appreciate the beauty that we have around us, you know, and appreciate the life around us as much as we possibly can, to take it all in and to drink it all in while we have the time, you know.
Absolutely, man. We're at a house wrecking party, and the party is coming to the end.
Right.
But the party is still going. Soak it up, make the best of every day. Yesterday, I was sitting here around the same time, and I watched the sun come up over the ocean in front of my house, and a pod of dolphins went by. If I hadn't got up to watch the dawn, I wouldn't have seen dolphins yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm up and at it, and I'm immersing myself as much as I can in the natural environment while it's still beautiful.
Yeah, that's, you know, and I urge everybody, you know, who can do that, who can take the time to do that, who are able to do that, you know, to do the same. I mean, I'm trying to do that with my kids, you know, really just spend time in nature, spend time talking about nature and talking about plants and animals and their relationship to each other and the relationship to us. Because I'm trying to counteract, you know, as much as I can, counteract that programming that we all have, that disconnect that we're, you know, encouraged to have more and more in the society, like to disconnect from what it actually is to be alive in this natural world, this natural habitat, you know. So as much as I can put that knowledge out there for my kids and for other people and encourage people to do that, you know.
A classic example of that is clouds of moths or blizzards of moths. Blizzards of moths is an expression used by Paul Ehrlich when I interviewed him. And when we were children and you drove through the country at night in a car, your headlights would just shine on a blizzard of moths everywhere in front of you. Children now are being born where that phenomenon is gone. If we don't talk to our kids about it, if we don't show them those old YouTube videos where they're all around, where you can see things like that,
yeah.
there's a tangible example of what's been lost right up there in your face. If kids didn't get told that that's what it used to be like, they'd have no idea what they've missed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kevin. I think we're reached about an hour, and
yeah, cool.
I think that's probably.
There's a whole lot of subjects we didn't get to. If you ever want to do this again, let me know. We'll have another go. We'll see what the people who watch this, whether they respond positively or not, or whether they want to hear any more from the two of us.
Well, I don't see how, you know, the battle of the Kevins could go wrong, right? So, I mean, there were so many items on your list that you sent me that we actually didn't talk about. We talked about very few of those items. So, yeah, let's definitely do this again.
Cool. Look forward to it.
Other sundry items. So thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate you. Thank you. Keep up the great work, by the way. And
I'd like to say the same to you. I think it's very courageous what you're doing, and I appreciate you having that courage and going public and doing what you're doing. Carry on. Keep it up.
It's courageous for all of us. It's courageous for all of us to speak on this. So let's continue. Thanks, Kevin. Have a good one.
Pleasure. Have a great extinction, mate.
All right. Peace.